Hey guys, so today we're going to learn about standard form. But first, before we get into standard form, we're going to recap how to find slope from a table or how to find slope from a graph, how to identify the y-intercept, and then how to write it in slope-intercept form first, and then we'll talk about standard form. Okay, so this is a table, this is a graph. They're going to depict the same line, they're just a different form. So I should get the same slope and y-intercept from this table as I do this graph, okay? But let's recap. If I want to find slope from a table, remember it's the change in y. Divided by the change in x. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my y values and figure out how is y changing. Well, I'm going from 4 to 1. Well, to go from 4 to 1, I know I'm subtracting 3. And I could have done that between any 2 points. I could have went from here, from 1 to negative 2. Well, to get from 1 to a negative 2, you also have to subtract 3. So it doesn't matter which 2 you go through. Okay, so now let's find the changing in my x's. So whichever ones, so let's say I wanted to find the change in these y's. Whatever y's you pick to find the change of, you have to use the same x's. So let's figure out how my x's change from negative 2 to 0. Well, to get from a negative 2 to a 0, I am adding 2. All right, so I have the changing of my y's. I have the changing in my x's. So the change in y goes on top. So the change in my y divided by the change in my x's, which is a positive 2. Okay, that's a fraction, negative 3/2. That's a fraction I cannot simplify, so I know that is my slope. All right, so now we need to find our y-intercept. Well, to identify our y-intercept, the y-intercept is the y value when the x is 0. So if I'm looking at my table, I see that x is 0 right here. So I know the y-intercept is the y value when the x is 0. So I know my y-intercept is a positive 1. Remember, that is your b value. So slope, we use the letter m to recognize slope. We use the letter b to recognize the y-intercept. Okay, so like I said, these are the same line, just a different form. Okay, so let's recap on how to find slope from a line. Okay, so remember, slope from a graph. To find slope from a graph, I like rise over run. And you have to have 2 good points, like perfect points that go through intersections. So there's several on here. Notice this goes straight through an intersection. This would be a good point. I'm going to go ahead and just put points on each of them. Let me zoom in, maybe that'd be easier. Okay, this is another good point, another good point, and another good point. Okay, so we have several good points to choose from. We need 2 of those. Okay, it doesn't matter which 2. All right, so I'm going to pick the first 2 I made, and I'm going to make an L between them. Okay, and then I'm going to figure out my rise and my run. Okay, so I'm going to count how many boxes does it rise. Well, that's 1, 2, 3. So it rises 3. And now I have to count how many boxes does it run and put that number on the denominator, the bottom. So I can see that it runs 2 boxes. Okay, so before you can stop on rise over run, this is extremely important. We read a graph like we read a book from left to right. As I go from the left to the right, as I slide, notice I'm going down. So I know that this line is going down, which tells me my slope must be a negative. So I know slope is a negative 3/2. So that's my value for m. Notice, I told you they're the same line. They should have the same slope. Okay, now we have to pick the y-intercept. So I need to look at the y-axis. So this one's the y-axis. And I need to look at where that blue line touches the y-axis. So notice this blue line and the y-axis intersect right here at 1. So that's my y-intercept, aka my b value. See? Told you they should be the same. All right, so that was just a recap on how to find slope and y-intercept if I'm given a table, and slope and y-intercept if I'm given a graph. Okay, so now that I found my slope and my y-intercept, I'm going to write the equation of this line in slope-intercept form. Remember, that's y equals mx plus b. So y equals, okay, I know I have to replace m with the slope that we found. Well, we found that our slope was -3/2, so I'm going to have y equals -3/2. I know behind slope, we put our variable x, and then I'm going to have plus b, so then I'm going to put plus my y-intercept. Well, we found our y-intercept is a +1, so I'm going to put +1. All right, so all of that should have been recap. All right, so what's new? How do I know what this line or what this linear equation would look like in standard form? Okay, well, standard form is ax plus by equals c, so I'm trying to figure out, and I gave us two options, okay? I want to figure out, is this the same line as this guy, or will this one be the same as this guy? So how can we figure that out? All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to rearrange this until y is by itself, and I'm going to compare. Once I get y by itself, does it match? Yes or no? And then I'm going to try the same thing here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my line. And I want y by itself. So if I want y by itself, the first thing I have to get rid of is this 3x. Notice it's a positive, so I'm going to take away 3x's from both sides. Okay, this 3x and this 3x cancel, so that -2y drops down. On the other side, I cannot subtract these numbers because one is a constant, a regular number, and one has a variable x on it, so they're not the same. So I'm going to write it as 2 minus 3x. All right, next step is if I want y by itself, I have to get rid of this -2. Notice they're touching, which means that multiplying, the opposite of multiply is divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by -2. My -2 cancel, so y drops down. Okay, notice on this other side, there's two things on the numerator. I'm going to take one at a time and divide by -2. So first, I'm going to take this 2 and divide by -2. Well, that's going to give me a -1. Then I'm going to take -3x and divide it by a -2. Well, a -3 divided by a -2 is a +3/2. And I can't forget about my x. Okay, this is perfect. This is in slope-intercept form now, but let's make it proper. Remember, we want to have our x's first. So what I'm going to do is just flip-flop these. So I'm going to have y equals, I have my +3/2 x that comes first, and then I'm going to have the number that's by itself, which is a -1, so I'm going to put -1. And I'm going to compare here to here. Are these exactly the same, yes or no? Well, notice this one I wanted a negative slope. This is a positive slope. I wanted a +1 y-intercept. This gives me a -1 y-intercept. So that does not match. Okay, hopefully this next one does. Okay, so let's solve for y. If I want to solve for y, I'm going to get rid of this 3x. So it's a positive 3x. I'm going to take away 3x's. Positive 3x, -3x cancel, so my +2y falls down. On the other side, I have 2 minus 3x. Next step, if I want y by itself, is to get rid of this 2. They're touching, which means multiply. Opposite of multiply is divide. So I'm going to divide by 2. What I do on one side, I do on the other. My 2's cancel, y drops down. Okay, remember, there's 2 things on top, so I need to take one at a time and divide by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. Negative 3x divided by 2. Well, I know a negative 3 divided by 2 is a negative 3 over 2. And I can't forget about that x. Okay, perfect. It's in slope-intercept form, but let's make it proper. Let's put our x's first. So y equals, I look at my x's, and in front of it I see it's a negative 3/2 x. Then I look at the number by itself. It's a positive 1, so I'm going to put a plus 1. I'm going to write that a little better. Okay, and then I compare here and here. Notice I ended up, when I solved for y, when I change it into slope-intercept form, I got the exact same thing, a slope of negative 3/2, a y-intercept of positive 1. So notice these are exactly the same. So this line right here, I can write the equation of that line in slope-intercept form, which is y equals negative 3/2 x plus 1. Or I can write it in standard form, which looks like 3x plus 2y equals 2. And remember, the way I could tell which one it was in standard is I solved for y. Once I solved for y, I compared to what I wanted here. All right, bye guys.